Hello, I'm with Salim Mansur, Professor Emeritus of Political Science at Western University in London, Ontario. And we're here today to talk about post-election 2021 in Canada, which saw the return of Justin Trudeau as Prime Minister in a minority government. Basically nothing has changed as far as the seats in the House goes. So it was pretty much a $600 million vanity project by Trudeau to try to get a majority, and he was not successful. And one of the biggest stories to come out of the election, of course, is the meteoric rise of the People's Party of Canada under Maxime Bernier. That party has basically tripled its popular support from 1.6% back in 2019 up to 5.1% in this election, according to Elections Canada. So, Salim, you're a political science professor. You are steeped in the history of Canadian politics, and I'd like to hear your viewpoint on how this election, Election 44, fits into Canadian history.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you for doing this. And if I might just take my own vanity project here and tell you that I taught in the Department of Political Science at Western University and almost for 35 years, and then retired at the end of 2019 or in 2019. But I am a Canadian, and it is my love of Canada. I never taught Canadian politics professionally in the university, but it's simply my love of Canada. I have immersed myself over the last 30 years in Canadian history, just the most remarkable history in terms of personalities, our founding fathers, Sir Johnny Macdonald and Sir Wilfrid Laurier, two of the greatest Canadian Prime Minister, or the greatest Canadian Prime Minister, and two of the greatest statesmen in world history. So that's my background. It's my love of Canada that I poured my heart and soul into this country, which took me in, and to which I'm so deeply, deeply grateful that they gave me, the country, this Canadian, gave me the opportunity to be where I am. So having said that, that's my vanity project out of the way. Yes, this was Justin Trudeau's vanity project. We all knew that. We have talked about it among ourselves, you and I, and others around me. I predicted, you predicted, we predicted both. We are again on record that it will be a minority government. And here we are. The map hasn't changed, just one seat up and one seat down. Mariam Monsef in Peterborough Quarter region. She's the cabinet minister that went down, talking about her brothers, the Taliban. The election was called on the day Kabul fell on August 15. And though the media and everybody else assiduously blacked out any discussion on foreign policy, and of course, the biggest story, the elephant in the room, Afghanistan, we went into the election and nothing changed. Nothing absolutely changed. I mean, they come out basically with the same number of seats. The differential is one seat or two seats, and the counts are over. The Liberals, again, the battleground was Ontario, and Liberals swept Ontario out of the 129 seats. Once again, 79 or 78 seats they captured. Toronto is once again red, 25-0, and the surrounding GTA is again the same score, 30 out of the remaining number of seats, so in the GTA and Southern Ontario. Similarly, in Quebec, there was basically no difference. Bloc Québécois took, I think, 33 or 34 seats. They had won 32 seats last time, if you have the number in front of you.
34 they have right now.
Okay, 34, so they picked up one seat. The Conservative remained stuck at 10 seats, I believe. That's the number for Conservative. No difference from 2019. And the Liberal again took their share, of the balance, 35 seats or something like that. So by the time the election reached the Ontario-Manitoba border, it was over. It was a minority government, and the situation hasn't changed in the West. In fact, interestingly, Robert, I mean, you have the numbers there. I don't. What I saw this morning, the Liberals picked up 2 seats, I believe, in Alberta. So in 2019, the Conservatives had taken 33 out of 34 seats of Alberta. This time, if Liberals have picked up 2 seats and NDP has maintained its 1 seat in the Edmonton Strathcona region, then the Conservatives are down, I think, 31 seats out of 34. But in Saskatchewan, the numbers are just the same. Saskatchewan and Manitoba, 14 seats in each provinces, and I believe the Conservative have taken all of the 14. You might want to correct me. In Saskatchewan, 14-0, and I think Manitoba is the same. And in BC, I'm not quite sure. Maritime turned in again, once again, the dependency province turned in for the Liberals. So nothing changed. Canada is very much a Libcon country. And what we said in 2019 is the same thing right now. But here is the strategic and clear difference, Robert. What we are seeing in this election, though PPC did not pick up any seat, and Maxime, the leader, did not take back his seat, which he lost in 2019. But the national average for PPC went from under 2% to almost 5+%. That's the national average, which is almost 3 times the vote that we got, the PPC got in 2019. PPC vote in 2019 was somewhere around about 300,000 plus or minus. This time it is over 800,000, closing in on 900,000.
Yes, 823,000.
Okay, so there we are. It's almost 3 times the number, and this is something that we have to reflect upon. Very quickly, I would say right now that in effect, this election has once again confirmed that the only party that stands with the people, Canadians, and with Canada is the PPC. All the rest, Liberals, Conservative, NDP, Green, and the Bloc are together. There's no difference. There's not a shade of difference. These are only matter of style. They are all together, and together they have thrown the Canadian people and Canada under the bus once again to be feasted upon by the globalist, the Marxist globalist agenda that is basically out to shred Western democracy and Western civilization.
Well, it's true. And in historical perspective, I've never seen, and I've been watching the Canadian political scene for over 30 years, I've never seen really a new party like this take off in the way that it has. Within just 2 elections, 3 years, the People's Party have garnered almost 1 million votes, and to see the turnout at the events for Maxime versus the turnout for an Aaron O'Toole or Justin Trudeau was quite remarkable, reminiscent of the United States under Trump versus Biden. And to see that translate into almost 1 million votes, I think that it's fair to say that the PPC is here to stay. They'll most likely get a seat at the next debates whenever the next election is, though looking at Justin Trudeau in a minority situation, that could be any time, again, because he is such a vain person and out for himself and his party. And so we can look forward to an election soon again, and the PPC, again, making more inroads. What's your take on the media coverage of the People's Party, and how did that influence the voting public when it came to casting a ballot for either the Uniparty or the People's Party?
Well, the mainstream media, the corporate media in Canada, is now clearly, openly, those Canadians who pay attention, is the Canadian version of Pravda or TASS. It is no longer a media that is an objective, free media that espouses free speech and therefore is open to critical discussion in the best sense of the term, educating the public, informing the public, and providing the public a window for them to understand for themselves the lay of the land. So none of that exists anymore. I mean, that's gone. This has been bought over by the Liberal Party, and shamelessly, they have gone to the trough to take their share of it. So PPC was blacked out. There was no reporting on the PPC when the election campaign began, as far as I saw. And whatever reporting there was, it was by the alternate media, the post-millennial, the TNC, and of course, the Rebel. But the mainstream media had blacked it out. Then halfway through the election, when they could no longer deny or turn away from the fact that there was this surging popular enthusiasm, populist enthusiasm, in the best sense of the term popular, right across Canada for the PPC and for Maxime, and the turnouts were just huge. I participated in some of them, for example, in Aylmer, which is Elgin Middlesex County, the riding just south of London, where I am. On the last week, the last big rally in Aylmer, attended by Maxime and by Randy Hillier, the turnout was estimated at in excess of 3,000. No politician has been or was drawing such a crowd, and same thing even inside the GTA and in Toronto. So the media had blacked it out, and then the media started reporting, and it was all negative smear. Right here in London, the story shot up, negativity, and that was carried through, as in, for instance, an example, in today's Maclean online, there are articles on the election, and the PPC reporting on the PPC in Maclean's media was that this is the rise. The PPC is the rise of the extremists, the racists, the bigots, the fringe element in Canadian politics, and that PPC has given this fringe element the platform to come out into the public, that the online website that is monitored by the authorities, the law enforcement agencies, report that Canada now stands at the head of just about every Western country in terms of online hate. And it is these people who are leading Canada in that direction, that we are on the web, the #1 country for white extremist, neo-Nazi, Christian fundamentalists, that is anti-immigrant and so on, Islamophobic, misogynistic. You know, all the words put together that Hillary Clinton launched against the people who rallied in 2016 for Donald Trump in that election, the deplorable. Well, they are not using the word deplorable, the mainstream media, but they're using all the words that I just now said: white extremist, neo-Nazi, fringe element, Islamophobic, anti-immigrant. So that is the face of the PPC in the mainstream media. And despite such animus, PPC got, over 800,000 vote, and by the time the mail-in ballot is over, maybe a few more thousand votes might be added. So we are within the PPC is within the kissing distance of 1 million vote in Canada, and this is phenomenal. There has been no party that has risen up in terms of public support, Canadians rallying around, people of all ethnic background, but yes, largely old stock Canadians, men, women, children of all ages coming together for the banner that and the call of PPC: no more lockdown, freedom. We do not want a segregated society, and people have rallied forward because for the last 19 months they have been living in this situation in which there has been their personal experiences such that they now know what is the taste of globalism and what they can expect going down the road. Is the rest of the country that has to catch up with the people who voted for PPC.
What about the Conservative Party? You were a conservative for many years, of course, and they prevented you from running because they called you, a Muslim man, an immigrant, Islamophobic. But, and I remember at that time, that's when you switched over to the PPC. You said basically that you were looking at the polls after Harper and said that the Conservative Party of Canada will never, ever be a majority ruling party again in Canada. And it seems that so far, you're right, they lost in 2019. They lost now again in 2021. They just cannot get over that hurdle of being so far left that they sometimes put the Liberals to shame. Now, they won the popular vote. And let me just look at the figures here. Conservatives got 33.8% of the popular vote versus the Liberals 32.4%. However, that does not translate into seats because of the urban-rural mix and how that vote is split around. But will you double down on that prediction that the Conservatives are dead, basically, as far as an opposition or a potential ruling party in Canada?
Well, thank you for reminding me, Robert. Yes, I was, excuse me, I've been on record since 2015. In fact, after 2015 election, I talked about that 170 seats to form the barest majority that is required in a 338 seat member parliament. And by the way, that 338 seat is going to grow given the manner in which the gates have been opened, and we can come back and talk about it with migration and immigration into Canada that is in full tide right now. So those numbers will grow. When the last time the Conservative Party under Stephen Harper won a majority, the only majority that Stephen Harper and the Conservative won after three efforts, 2006, 2008, and then 2011. At that time, 151 seats was needed for the majority. I think the Conservative won 155 seats. I'm talking now from my memory bank. 170 seats, I said at that time, was a bridge too far, and that the Conservative have to really seriously think about how to make the case for conservatism and for Canada going forward into time. But what has happened is they have retrenched even further in becoming what I again talked about with you, the spare wheel of the Laurentian elite. And as a spare wheel of the Laurentian elite, they're running flat. I mean, I recall Peter MacKay at the end of the 2019 election, when Andrew Scheer expelled me from the party by calling me an Islamophobe when I was seeking the nomination here in London West. With the Conservative Party, a party that I had been associated with for a quarter-plus century, going back to the early 1990s with Preston Manning. Peter MacKay said that Andrew Scheer failed to score the goal in an open net. Well, this is the second time that Erin O'Toole and his crack brain trust has failed to score on an open net. When did we ever, in our Canadian history, have a prime minister going into an election with one ethical violation? This man went into this election with 3, if not 4 ethical violations. Three is a strikeout, and yet with 3 or 4 I say 4 because I don't know whether the case of Admiral Norman was actually a pronouncement came down from the ethics commissioner before the parliament folded. But the 3 that is definitive are with the ethical violation with the leader of the Aga Khan community taking a free ride to his private island after winning the first election in 2015. Then, of course, the most notorious of all was the SNC Lavalin scandal, where the Attorney General and Justice Minister Jody Wilson-Raybould was removed and then finally thrown out of the caucus for standing up for law and order and precedent, which is what we expect of our Attorney General and Justice Minister. If we still believe in a country where, equality before the law and justice is blind, and for standing up for those principles, which is as old as Magna Carta, Jody Wilson-Raybould, the first cabinet member who comes from the First Nation, was expelled by this prime minister. So that was an ethical violation that the ethics commissioner came down with. And the third ethics violation was with the we. They're handing out of money to this quote unquote charitable organization, which was another way to get a kickback into the Liberal Party. And so you had this prime minister and a blackface, again, that the story came out the night before the election, one more time. And yet Aaron O'Toole couldn't score in an open net. So the question, what is the Conservative Party? And I have maintained that the Conservative Party is the party of the Decepticon. It is worse than the Liberal Party, because the Liberal Party, we know what it is. It is a party of forked tongue. It is not the party of Sir Wilfrid Laurier. It is a party of forked tongue. And that forked tongue has now been confirmed by Jody Wilson-Raybould in the book that came out and was released a week ago before the election, Indian in the Cabinet. That is her memoir of the time with the Liberal Party and her term as the Attorney General and Justice Minister. Now, with no uncertain term, no ambiguity, with complete clarity. And now that clarity can be, verified through the record that was held back by the Prime Minister, the PMO, at the time when this thing was unfolding. Jody Wilson-Raybould has reports that the Prime Minister wanted her to lie. She wanted her to lie on the SNC Lavalin affair and give SNC Lavalin a DPA, deferred a judgment on the case that was being they were going to be put on trial for, and so there it is. And yet Aaron O'Toole, the Conservative Party, did not fail. So I would say here, Robert, and we can go deeper into this. I would say here, for the Conservative Party, losing is not a feature. It is the bug in the system. It is a spare wheel. It will only win when the Laurentian elite feel that it is time for a little bit of change, the cosmetic change, So they'll pump up the tire, put the spare wheel in there, and let the Liberals regroup with the leadership change. And then the following election, the spare wheel will be put back in the boot of the car, the trunk of the car. So it is not a feature losing. It's not a bug. It is a feature of the Conservative Party. And we can put that in historical context.
I've always thought of the Conservative Party as a sort of a firewall between people like Maxime, yourself, anybody who's in it for Canada and individual freedom. They are a firewall, preventing anybody from attacking the Liberals, because they have taken on the mantle of being the number 2 party. And to get to the Liberals, you've got to go through them first. And they're protecting a Liberal government. And that seems to be their role, is to make sure that the Liberal Party get in. And this time they've done it by mirroring the platform of the Liberals. There was virtually no distinguishing characteristics in the Conservative platform over that of the Liberals. In fact, it was so close. We've all come to call them the LibCon party or the Con-Lib party or the Una party, and it's getting quite comical. And the only reason that this is allowed to happen is because of the media. The Liberal government paid off the media $61 million just prior to the election call, and the records have been released that a lot of that, the biggest lion's share of that, went to Post Media, run by an American company, to keep, supposedly, ostensibly, this money is to keep Canadian newspapers afloat. In reality, what it is a bribe. If you go out against the Liberal government or against the doctrine of the World Health Organization or against any sort of officialdom, the threat of losing that money is very real. And so we now have a uniparty surrounded by a unipress, a welfare press that is there, put in place to protect the citizens against the truth from coming out. A lot of people have said that without the press, Obama would never have gotten in. Trudeau never would have gotten in. None of this is what is happening around us now with the lockdowns would have happened if only the press had done what people consider the job of the press to be, and that is to be in opposition to those in power and to bring forward discussion, debate, open debate, truth, facts. And
Yes, I mean, Robert, I mean, the press has always been who pays the piper in that sense of the term. And so long there is, again, back to the principle of free market and open society, so long there is, from the point of view of the society itself, that is the government, the constitutional framework within which a liberal democracy such as ours is supposed to work, or the United States or Britain, so long there is an open society and a free market, who pays the piper will sing the tune, but there will be many pipers because there will be many others in a free market, competing for the share of the market. And therefore there will be the competition. And it is through the competition that people can get a range of opinion and a range of ideas and a range in a spectrum what the facts and the figures are in terms of what is being reported, and then they can sit and decide for themselves. But if everyone is pouring the same, that is back to the the Soviet model, the TASS and the Pravda. I mean, it was Stalin who said, it is not the people who vote that count, it is the people who count the vote that counts. And it is not, it was Goebbels and it was the German Nazis who perfected the system. You tell a lie and then you repeat it and make the lie a bigger lie and a bigger lie, and it will sell because it will wash out everything so long you control the medium. And it was Canadian, Marshall McLuhan, who said, the medium is the message. So who controls the medium? Back to Stalin, who counts the vote that matters. And so that's where we are. And yet, the people are waking up. I mean, there is a sense of despondency among those people who watch Canadian politics, who, passionately concerned about their country, who care about where we are going. There is a despondency this morning, the day after the election, and that despondency will remain, and that's why we have almost, more than a third of the Canadians not voting, because what difference does it make, that somewhere between 37 and 40% Canadians have given up on voting. But after we go through all of the despondency, here it is, almost 1 million people came out and voted for a party, not regionally, not in one place like the Bloc Québécois, or in a little urban college town like the Green Party, whether it is in Guelph, Ontario, or in somewhere in New Brunswick around Dalhousie or Nova Scotia, or way out in the Lotus Land of British Columbia, where they elected Elizabeth May. No, this was spread right across the country. So the Nova Scotian, the New Brunswicker, the people even in Quebec, Quebec voted 6% PPC according to 338canada.com, Ontario, Manitoba, so on and so forth. This was across the country. So there is that other reality. You know, it might take time because, again, the media had blacked out the PPC. And so there was no news. It was, again, for the ground level. This was truly a grassroots movement. People put their money and their time. There was no corporate money. There was no, of course, corporate support. And it was all negative. But we flip back to the conservative, which is what the question you asked. It is very interesting. This is the 91st year. 91 years ago, the Progressive Conservative Party, led by R.B. Bennett, for the first time elected a progressive conservative government. I say progressive conservative because prior to that, there was Conservative Party of Sir Johnny Macdonald, and then there was the Progressive Party of the farmers in the prairies, basically in Manitoba and Saskatchewan, and to some extent up in the Maritime. And that was the Progressive Party. And the Progressive Party merged with the Conservative Party. And then the Progressive Party itself split on the basis of ideological differences. Those who were progressive socialists, they morphed into the Commonwealth of Canadian Federation that became the New Democratic Party with its foundation in Saskatchewan and Tommy Douglas and all of that. The other one that was basically a little more open towards free market and so on, but they wanted the support in those days of the Great Depression in terms of supply cartel, came into the making of the Progressive Conservative Party. So that was 1930, one term of R.B. Bennett, and then the return of the Liberal under Mackenzie King. 1930, the next time you have a majority conservative government is John Diefenbaker in 1958, you know, and then it was one term. It was a minority government in 1956, a majority in 1958, and the Diefenbaker was out, knifed by the progressive Dalton Camp from New Brunswick and his clique, you know. Diefenbaker was the last conservative in the tradition of Sir Johnny Macdonald, a patriot. He gave Canada its first bill, you know, the Bill of Rights, you know. He stood for the flag, which happened to be the old ensign, but he was a Canadian. And for the progressive elements, this was not the Canada that they were going to fight and defend. They were going to be the other version, the flip side of the Liberal Party. That is what's going on and evolved through Lester Pearson and Pierre Elliott Trudeau into where the Liberal Party have come. Now the Liberal Party is nothing but just a charade of Marxist communists, you know. The son is more devoted to Fidel Castro than he is to Sir Wilfrid Laurier. You know, on the debate stage, unlike his father 40 years ago, in the debate stage, his father, in the famous debate with René Lévesque, talked about that I am Pierre, I am Elliot, I am English, I am French, I'm a Canadian. It was an echo of Sir Wilfrid Laurier that, you know, I am first, last, and always a Canadian. What does the son say in this debate in 2021 on the Nationals debate? He says, I'm a Quebecois.
Not only that, Salim, he also said that addressing Canadians, he says there are Canadians and Quebecers. He differentiates the two, Canadians and Quebecers, except for the fact that he was actually born, I understand, in Ontario.
Exactly. And he was totally, you know, in a sense, in a state of incoherence in the debate. And here we have this man, once again, holding the levers of power in this country. So back to the conservative. So 1958, and then what happened? 20 years later, another conservative, progressive conservative, Joe Clark, the man who lost his luggage and then who lost his government within 6 months of election. Pierre Trudeau was out somewhere in Western Canada in the lake with his buffalo skin jacket, canoeing. And they called him back with a month growth on his face. They called him back to the parliament on the budget vote. Joe Clark lost the budget vote. He couldn't count. And Trudeau was back in office in 1980 for the next round, and if we now step back and look at it, that was the beginning of the dismantling of Canada in a really public policy sense. And then you have, that was 20 years after Diefenbaker, and then you have a slight break in 84. Mulroney comes back, but Mulroney is a Quebec boy. He's from Baie-Comeau. He only, as an opportunist, ran for the Conservative Party because he would not get the leadership of the Liberal Party. It was a turn for John Turner. You had Pierre Trudeau, the French Canadian, the classic move of the Liberals to rotate between French and English. So Lester Pearson, Pierre Trudeau, and now it was the turn of John Turner. And John Turner did become the leader. So there was no place for Mulroney to run for a leadership in the Liberal Party. He ran against a completely, hopelessly, out of his depth, Joe Who, and he won the leadership, and getting that leadership, he was able to draw again as a progressive conservative, unlike John Diefenbaker, because John Diefenbaker came from Prince Albert in the West. The man was unilingual. He was English speaking. Mulroney, as the head of the progressive conservative, was from Baie-Comeau. He was a Quebecois, an Irish Quebecois. He spoke French with a Quebec accent, And so, again, the Quebec tribe rallied around him, and he won. He won the election of 1984, repeated it in 1988 with an overwhelming majority. His majority was even larger than John Diefenbaker. And he brought down the free trade agreement, but then he did what the boys from Quebec expected. Remember, it was the famous line of Mulroney, you dance with the boys who brought you. So he danced with the boys who brought him. That is Quebec. Finally, the straw that broke the camel's back was on the question of giving the contract on CF-18 either to Bristol, Canada, and Winnipeg, or to the Bombardier in Quebec. And even though the Bristol, Canada, and Winnipeg had a much better and more competitive tender, Mulroney gave it to the boys who brought him to the dance, and that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And from the largest majority in Canadian history that a conservative or progressive conservative has won, Mulroney collapsed, his party collapsed to 2 seats. And then it was the Reform Party, and here is the parallel. The utter alienation of Western Canadian conservatives, which means basically conservative means classical liberals in the sense of freedom issue. They, again, alienated from central Canada. They began to say, we have to build a party that represents us in the country. We are not going to separate, but we are going to have our share in a Canadian Confederation. That was the birth of the Reform Party. That was a party with 1 seat in the first election in 1988, eventually became, after 3 or 4 iterations, Her Majesty's Loyal Opposition under Preston Manning in 1997, lost the 2000 election to Jacques Chrétien when there was a leadership change in the Reform Party, and Stockwell Day took the leadership from Preston Manning. We don't know what would have happened if Preston Manning had remained the leader. but President Manning was gone. And then after the 2000 election, there was a leadership campaign. Stephen Harper took the leadership away from Stockwell Day and then reached out to the progressive conservative to merge. What the selling point was that unless we merge, we cannot win. We have to merge. We have to become one party. It was Stephen Harper's people who raised the issue of splitting the vote. If you now go back historically, so if there's a progress, and you remember, you ran in 2000 just as I did, remember? And our biggest competition was not with the Liberals, but with the progressive conservative. In your riding of London Fanshawe, I ran in London West, even though I got the second highest number of votes in London West. I don't remember what your vote was.
Same here, second highest. Same here, we both came in second, but there's no prize for second.
Yeah. But that was the split. I mean, if we had a vote, and that was the argument, and it came to, and the result was that, yes, we won 2 minority government and a majority in 2011. It is the progressive conservative poison that basically swallowed the Reform Party. What we have under Andrew Scheer, beginning with Stephen Harper, Andrew Scheer, Aaron O'Toole, is nothing but the recycled version of R.B. Bennett and Joe Clark and Brian Mulroney. They are sellout. They are the spare wheel of the Laurentian elite. So what we have now, if this thing grows, and I expect it will grow, should grow, given the situation we are in country, and the reality is going to bite us very hard with the way this prime minister has gone throwing money. As we pointed out, in 1919, our budget deficit was in the range of $30 billion. In 2 years, our budget deficit, according to the last budget that this prime minister presented in the House, that deficit was in the range of $350 billion. And the money has been throwing and piling up. So the deficits are actually the level of debt, the total debt that is rising, and our debt structure is now almost encroaching upon twice the GDP, and the budget deficit we cannot count. Each Canadian is now carrying a debt load of 30,000 plus. A baby born right now in Canada comes in carrying $30,000 debt load on that poor baby just out in swaddling clothes.
To put it into another perspective, Salim, somebody has said, and I haven't the figures in front of me, that the Liberals under Trudeau have added to the debt more in his short term than every single prime minister and every single government since Confederation. He's done that himself. So, yeah, the very fact that you can't have a conservative government win an election with those kinds of things in their favor, to show not only the philosophic incompetence of the Liberals, but also the financial incompetence of running a country, means that there is never going to be another conservative party in power again, whether minority or majority. But I always thought of conservatives, well, I shouldn't say always, because this is a learning process, but I've come to the realization that the Conservatives are a name looking for a political ideology. You can go back to John A. Macdonald. John A. Macdonald's party wasn't actually the Conservative Party, it was the Liberal Conservative Party, if you recall. So you got Liberal Conservative, Progressive Conservative, Reform, Canadian Alliance, Conservative, and they're always factions fighting publicly. And that's always been their downfall. They don't have a consistent way to express their ideology because they don't really have an ideology. They simply are a group of people with a hodgepodge of vague notions of how to run a country, and they're looking for a cohesive way to get that message across. And of course, it can't be brought across because there is no cohesive philosophy behind that particular party. So they're basically now a relic of the past. we can throw out the Conservative Party, I think, meaning, of course, that the only effective opposition ideologically to the Liberals is Maxime Bernier and the People's Party of Canada.
Yes, I would add, I would qualify, Robert, in the following way. I share with you your thoughts, what you have just expressed, but I will add and qualify. Right now, at this moment as we speak, PPC is now bigger than Maxime Bernier. Maxime Bernier now has to decide whether he is going to be the leader of the PPC and carry that voice that the people have come across and now articulated. That is the freedom agenda. That is an agenda for Canada, Canada first, Canadian nationalism. I say this, deliberately, that PPC is a nationalist party, not a conservative party, because the word conservatism has no further meaning anymore. It is about Canada first, the struggle of what remains of the 21st century. I would also say that we have now entered truly the 21st century, that the fall of Kabul in August 15, the day the election was called, was actual opening of the 21st century. The long 20th century ended, and that's another story, but the long 20th century ended with the fall of Kabul, because the war in Afghanistan was the last battle, the last war of the Cold War, and it's over. And America and Canada and Europe have entered the 21st century, and the Eurocentric age is also over. And that's also a conversation we need to have, that is over. We are now in the new world, the 21st century, and world politics and world history is now pivoting. The fall of Kabul, in that sense, the larger sense, is not the Afghan people, it is the history that what it means, signifies, is pivoting towards Asia. That is mainland Asia, which is the most dynamic population in terms of numbers. With the new technology, it will be the hub of the market. That's where the market is going to be. That's where the struggle is. Canada, too, is a Pacific region. And so we have to talk about those things. And you saw there was no discussion of the foreign policy in this age. Okay, it was a COVID-19 election, fair enough. But going forward, this is the beginning. So we are in a completely new situation going forward, and we have to think about that. So Maxime will have to make that decision. Quebec, if you give me a few more minutes, I would say that in retrospect, the 1980 election of Pierre Trudeau, the referendum, and then the bringing back of the charter, looking back at it, it was Joe who again failed to score in the open net. In fact, it began because if Joe Hu had won, if Joe Hu had counted properly, if Joe Hu had paid attention to people like, the man from your part of the world, John Crosby, who, despite everything, was a man of a greater vision and a greater strength and a greater conviction at that time, then it is quite possible that Quebec would have opted out of Canada in whatever mechanism, sovereign association, or then have another vote, referendum. They want to be a nation, opted out. And that would have been, in a way, the liberation of English Canada. That's this 20% weight for which the rest 80% had basically compromised their aspiration, their ambition, and so on and so forth. That would have been ended, and Canada would have then been released from that weight and would have gone on to its living up to its fullest potential, and as an English Canada alongside the United States, the equalization payments, the the whole issue of our natural resources that this man and the Quebec government have basically stifled and suffocated, even though they milk every drachma of equalization payment from Western Canada. That all of that would have changed, and we would have been in a totally different scenario. So that's where I come back to. This election has clearly, once again, as if we need a reminder, demonstrated how dysfunctional, how authoritarian and centralized Canadian politics is under the Laurentian elite. And this will only grow. And the vote for the PPC is an indication that that growing number of people want a new resolution. And that's the conversation we will need to have. The only other thing I would qualify about Sir Johnny Macdonald and your historically correct view that his first government, which, by the way, the first election in the history of Canada as a dominion, that is after 1867, Dominion status, the first election for the parliament, the first parliament of Canada, was also held in September of 1867. And the party that Johnny Macdonald represented in the ballot was liberal conservative, and for a very good reason. He was bringing people together. It was a coalition. It was a nation building exercise. It was just like, say, the people who became the Federalists in America and the Democrats in America, Jefferson and Adam. George Washington, as the father of the country, brought them together to get the Constitution passed. That is what Johnny Macdonald was doing. But Johnny Macdonald was, at the time that he was living in, and the world that he was living in, and the world that he was looking at for his own views of politics. We are a parliamentary system of government. We are based upon the English model. Was the great English Prime Minister Disraeli conservative? And conservative at that time meant small government, meant some of the issues of freedom and so on and so forth. And that was his part. View of the world. And the other view of the world that came from the younger man who then became the prime minister in the 1890s, Sir Wilfrid Laurier, was the articulation as a French Canadian of the vision of one Canada, unhyphenated Canada, and that's the vision. But then that vision was sliced and diced to where we have become. By the way, under this whole new situation of vaccination and vaccine passport, the irony is so immense. People have to wake up to. Canada is backing into South Africa, into an apartheid state, a segregation between those who are vaccinated and those who are unvaccinated. The vaccinated treated in one way, the unvaccinated treated as the untouchable. And I know what is an untouchable, coming from a country with a history of untouchable, So this is where we have arrived. And this is where the vote for the PPC is a vote for coming back to rebuilding what Johnny Macdonald and Sir Wilfrid Laurier represented. And I hope we will strike that conversation going forward.
Sounds like a good place to end it right there, Salim, with a bit of optimism. Thanks again for your insight.
Thank you so much.